All right, so the second section of the unit is on the cell membrane. The cell membrane is a really important structure that we want to spend a little bit of time talking about more in depth because it will lead into the next sections on transport. The cell membrane is what's responsible for regulating what goes in and out of the cell. It is responsible essentially for maintaining the homeostasis of the cell itself. It is what we call selectively permeable, which means that some substances can enter and leave, but others can't. So it kind of regulates what goes in and out. Typically, if we're looking in general terms what the cell is allowing in and out, it's going to allow nutrients to come in, but it's going to push the wastes out. In addition, it provides protection and support for the cell. It basically defines the boundaries of life, if you want to think of it that way. If we look at the cell membrane itself, it is made up of what we call a phospholipid bilayer. So we actually have two layers of lipid molecules that make up this cell membrane. It's kind of like a sandwich. The lipids are kind of like the bread, and then there's some fluid in between that allows it to kind of hold together. There are also proteins that run through the lipid bilayer. And again, this lipid bilayer it's not rigid. It's like I said, it's what we call fluid. It moves. The lipid molecules are able to kind of move around a little bit, but they maintain the form of the cell. These proteins that run through are important because they act as some different things that we'll outline on the next slide. In addition to the proteins, those proteins sometimes can have carbohydrate molecules, and those act as sensors and anchors for the cell. It allows the cell to communicate with other cells using those carbohydrate chains. The proteins themselves are multifunctional though. They can act as things like receptors, so they can actually act as almost like headphones for the cell. It lets them receive messages. They can act as channels for different types of transport that we will get into later. They can carry substances across the membrane, kind of piggyback them in. They can act as enzymes to facilitate reactions right on the cell membrane. They can act as anchors, like the carbohydrate chains, and they can act as identifiers. We call these identifiers antigens, and all of your cells have them. It's basically, an identifier is kind of like a name tag. Basically says, hi, I belong to Susie. And if the cells don't have that right name tag on there, then our immune system actually kicks in and will attack it. So the protein receptors on the surface of the membrane are there in addition to those carbohydrate chains, and they allow, like I said, that communication between the cells, and that's really important here. It regulates many of the cell functions, like growth and division, because if those protein receptors bump into another cell, they know the cell has gotten too large for that space, so it actually will divide to make two smaller cells, and that'll give that cell or those new cells some more room. This is typically what we look at when we think of a cell membrane itself. So the yellow heads, and you can see the tails kind of going in towards the middle, those are the lipids, and you can see that there's two layers of the lipids. We have a protein channel right here. We have another embedded protein with a carbohydrate chain in the blue, okay, going up towards the outside. This is another way to look at it. You can see it's pretty complex in terms of its arrangement. It's a very, very simple structure, but at the same time there's a lot going on here. So let's flip over to our handout here, and I actually didn't pop up a thing up here because the first thing we have to do is draw. It says, draw a diagram of a portion of a cell membrane. Label the cytoplasm and the area outside of the cell. A sample phospholipid and membrane protein have been diagrammed for you. So, what we're going to do is we're just going to draw a little section of it. Okay, so we're going to start off with our phospholipids. Just put them together. Now remember, we have two layers of them, so we also have to make this other part coming up. And let's insert one of the membrane proteins. So the membrane protein actually spans the entire width of the cell membrane, and then we have the carbohydrate chain attached. have some more lipids to the side. And that's pretty much it. That's all we have to do. Okay, the question that is down below on that one. What do the carbohydrate chains on some membrane proteins do? They act as sensors and anchors. So this concludes our talking about the cell membrane, and in the next one we're going to move on to transport.